Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 8th talk of the IndoPhon inaugural talk series. I am Reenu Punus, Assistant Professor in the Humanities and Social Sciences Department at IIT Palakkad. Before I introduce our speaker for today, I would like to begin with a brief intro to IndoPhon for the benefit of our viewers and participants who may be joining us today for the first time. The idea of IndoPhon was born out of the awareness that the Indian linguistics milieu lacked a formal community which focuses on speech-related research. And we hope that over time we can be a part of the process of building a collective of phonetics phonology enthusiasts in a way that will further research in these areas. And IndoPhon is the first step in that direction. We have two platforms set up for discussion. Knowledge and collaborative discussion Agora, #NoCoda, is intended to be a community of researchers who want to build a non-hierarchical research and collaboration framework that emphasizes the need for a free flow of ideas, questions, data, methods, and science. #NoCoda is hosted as a server on Discord. To join the #NoCoda Discord server, you can write to us at nocoda@gmail.com. We also have set up a Google discussion forum to initiate conversations on all the talks hosted by IndoPhon, to ask and explore answers to old and new questions on the topics that are covered in these talks. To join the Google discussion forum, you can write to us at indophon.india@gmail.com. We look forward to your active participation on #NoCoda and the Google discussion forum. Currently, there are 5 of us working behind the scenes of IndoPhon: Professor Shakuntala Mahanta at IIT Guwahati, Professor Indranil Datta at Jadavpur University, Dr. Somdev Kar at IIT Ropar, Dr. Amalesh Gope at Tezpur University, and me at IIT Palakkad. The inaugural series, which began on the 5th of October and will end on 15th December this year, boasts of an exciting lineup of experts working on diverse aspects of phonetics and phonology in different parts of the world. Over the last 2 months and the 7 previous talks we've had so far, we are happy and humbled to share with all of you that our talks have garnered over 2,500 views, and we have 223 subscribers as of today. We would like to thank all of you for your enthusiasm and your active participation, and we hope you will continue to support our endeavors. And now I am absolutely delighted to introduce to all of you our speaker for today, who was my PhD supervisor many years ago, Professor Ghada Khattab. She is a professor in phonetics and phonology in the School of Education, Communication, and Language Sciences at Newcastle University. Ghada completed her BA in English language and PG certificate in English language teaching at the American University of Beirut before moving to Leeds University, where she completed her MA and PhD in linguistics, specializing in phonological development in monolingual and bilingual contexts. Since then, she has been working at Newcastle University, where she heads the Phonetics and Phonology Lab. Ghada has spearheaded research in the areas of phonological development in monolingual and bilingual children, Arabic phonetics and phonology, and sociolinguistics. She has collaborated with colleagues at Newcastle, Plymouth, York, France, Norway, Germany, the USA, and around the Arab world on projects that look at language development in lesser studied languages and in multilingual contexts. She has also supervised several doctoral and postdoctoral researchers in this area and has published widely on all aspects of her research. Today, she will be speaking to us on the crucial role of variability in input to bilingual and second language learners. Welcome to IndoPhon, Ghada, and over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much for having me. It's a real honor, and it's so nice to reconnect with previous PhD students like Reenu. Okay, I just thought I'd start by telling you a little bit about why in bilingual research for some time now. First of all, when I started doing my PhD in the early 2000s, this real obsession within bilingualism research in this 1 or 2 systems question. So, do bilinguals develop one or two different, say, linguistic or phonological systems for their languages. Now, those of you who work in sociolinguistics and who are familiar with variability will know straight away that the idea that there was one system only for each language is preposterous. But also that if we're asking it from a very early age, the research of the likes of Marilyn Veeman and others has shown us that looking for a system at that point is a little bit futile. And in a way, children or infants are still making sense of the input around them and gradually building what will inevitably be systems. That, in a way, brought into focus for me the multiple also native and non-native varieties that are present in bilingual, in input to bilinguals. And I wanted to investigate the role that they play in developing phonological knowledge for the bilingual, but also more recently, the role they've played in the diminishing role of this native speaker ideal that we all have had for a long time, whether in L2 phonology research or bilingual research or even foreign language teaching and learning in the classroom. So, to do that then, let's think about these systems that we're talking about. Take two languages like English and Arabic, and you might, from a very simplistic view, put together in the middle there the bunch of sounds, consonants, and vowels that they have in common. Now, this is obviously very problematic. It's very much at a sort of phoneme, phone level, doesn't say anything about their realizations in the different languages. But it's there, and it's something that researchers have been interested in for a long time to look at. Not only, for instance, the sounds that might be only in English, like dental fricatives if you discount standard Arabic, or particular lax vowels or back vowels that aren't there for Arabic, or diphthongs, and that are only in Arabic, like, for instance, back stops and fricatives, a trilled R that's on top of an existing R sound in Arabic, and these short versions of Arabic vowels that are quite different from, potentially, from the lax vowels in English. So the interest has been in not just how, say, bilinguals or second language learners acquire these sounds that are particular to one language or the other, but those that we call in common, and how it is that bilinguals come to learn the different realizations for these in the different languages. And this has been really at the heart of work within the area of native and non-native varieties, what used to be termed L2 interference became more interaction and convergence, and the terminology has changed over the years depending on how the thought processes and the theory behind it has changed in terms of how we see the potential interaction between the two languages and whether we see it as a negative or a positive thing. Now, there's also variability within language, and this is looked at a lot less often than across languages when we're looking at the languages of bilinguals. So say, take English-Arabic bilinguals growing up in the UK, and what they might be exposed to is the kind of English that I'm calling in an English context. So it might be outside the home, it might be with their monolingual English friends, or in fact bilingual or other speakers of other English varieties. And for just a few examples for British English children, they might hear a non-rhotic pronunciation of shark. They might hear a velarized L in coda position, as in feel. And they might hear an approximate R in R and an O diphthong-like realization of the goat vowel, to use the Wells's lexical sets. Now, for these 3 or 4 phonological variables I've mentioned, they will also hear other realizations that are potentially non-native or just native varieties from other English varieties. So they might hear a rhotic shark realization, or a clear L at the end of fil, or road for road. Now, those, like I said, might come from the English that they might hear and or use themselves in what I'm terming Arabic context. So here it could be when communicating with other bilingual Arabic speakers. It could be when they code switch from Arabic to English and bring in particular lexical items, but the sort of frame is still Arabic. But those are not the only possibilities, of course. They might also produce what we might term native-like realizations for these words, even in an Arabic context, for particular strategies, communicative strategies, divergence or convergence from the speaker who they're having a conversation with. So when we're looking at whether bilinguals acquire the sound system of English, what do we look at? Do we just compare them with the ones on the left? Or do we also include realizations that are prevalent in the input and in what they produce themselves from other varieties? I would argue that bilingualism research, especially one that is interested in this 1 or 2 systems question, has mostly focused on the realizations that you see on the left here. And I think if we do that, we are truly missing a large part of the repertoire that bilinguals are both exposed to and use themselves. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the work I've done in this area, building on the PhD that looked at the acquisition of sociolinguistic variation. And this was work with English-Arabic bilinguals who were at the time aged 5 to 10 and growing up in the UK, in Yorkshire in particular. And I wanted to focus on sounds that are part of the inventory of both languages. So these sounds we call in common, very problematic term, but that differ in their production patterns. And I wanted to find out if bilinguals acquire different production patterns for these. And I was very determined to find that bilinguals are indeed very good at producing English-like phonetics for English and Arabic-like phonetics for Arabic, and that indeed they had 2 different systems. And I was very, as obsessed as other people with this question. But I was also interested in whether and how bilinguals acquire accent features that are relevant to their communities, especially when the home language is not that of the community language. So in the case of these bilinguals, they had parents who were second language speakers of English and who spoke mostly Arabic at home. So amongst the features I looked at, so let's assume that Arabic and English have BDG and TK, P in loanwords in Arabic. And that in Arabic, BDG have pre-voicing and PTK have unaspiration to short aspiration. Whereas in English, the realizations are what you see in green. BDG are phonetically voiceless and therefore mostly shortly aspirated, and PTK have proper aspiration. And so the immediate question is what bilinguals do with regards to acquiring English-like BDG, which shares phonetic features with Arabic-like PTK. And do they have different strategies and realization patterns for them? So that was one of the aspects I was interested in. The other one looked at liquids. Again, both languages have L's, but in Arabic, L's are clear throughout. So whether it's in onset position, life or fil, and I'm not dealing with pharyngalized context today. Whereas in sort of what I'm going to call mainstream English varieties, so the varieties that bilinguals might hear either from, say, standard like English or the English that their parents will have heard, there's a clear L in onset position leaf as opposed to feel, a dark one in coda. But then to look at bilinguals being raised in Yorkshire, you need to look at L realization in Yorkshire, and typically it's a dark L throughout. So at least 3 sets of realizations. The same applies to R. So in Arabic, R is a tap or a trill. So you get the word for road, tariq, and bar for terrain. It's mostly approximant in English, road, and it's a non-rhotic variety, bar. But there's also a labiodental variant, which is not so much a Yorkshire English, but a variant that's been used in lots of different varieties in British English, and that's present mostly in younger speakers, but spreading all the time. Then you could look at vowels as well. Now here I'm focusing on English vowels, and again, how they might be realized in at least 3 of the varieties that bilinguals are exposed to. So you could get an Arabic accented type that's similar to what their parents might produce, either from what they learned in foreign language classrooms or just the influence of their L1. And you, again, to use vowels as lexical sets, you take the face vowel and it might have an A-like realization, which shares its variant with a typical English mainstream realizations, standard like face. But in Yorkshire English, face, a monophthongal realization is very common. Take strut, and again, they might hear an or an like thing from an Arabic accented variant, an like thing from a standard like realization, but an strut or a strut from Yorkshire English speakers, and so on. So the same applies to vowels like start and goat. At least 3 different sets of realizations. So how do the bilinguals then demonstrate, or do they demonstrate awareness or use of these different variants in their own production? What you're seeing here are VOT results. So in millisecond, the distribution of voice onset time patterns on the left-hand side by monolingual English friends who are friends of the bilinguals I recorded. And you get the pattern you might expect, short lag for BDG, long lag for PTK. And the bilinguals in English are doing pretty much the same, with just the odd case of pre-voicing for BDG. Then you look at their productions in Arabic, and the Arabic, monolingual Arabic children do mostly pre-voicing, so but there's short aspiration as well, and a short lag to slight aspiration for their PTK. Now, the bilingual children in this study were English dominant, so they still do quite a bit of aspiration for their PTK, but there's definitely significant difference between their English and Arabic PTKs. And again, they produce some pre-voicing for BDG, but they're still producing some short aspiration. In other words, they have 2 different modes of production for their languages, but what I've presented to you so far comes only from the sessions with either with monolingual English friends or in Arabic with their parents. Now, what happened in the sessions in Arabic with their parents is that the children code switched. And what I'm showing you here are English words with PTK, but that were produced either in the English sessions, and the same words happen to be produced in the Arabic sessions with the mums when the children decided to switch words or phrases. And the VOT that you see for these words is significantly different in the 2 sessions. So very much showing long lag, as you might expect for English, and very much short lag for Arabic. So they have these short like versions of English PTK for English words, but they are being used in different contexts. The same applied to the other phonological variables. So I'm showing you here the results for laterals. And again, in onset position, you're seeing English laterals on the left-hand side, the English friends, and on the right-hand side, the bilinguals. They mostly produce clear L's, as opposed to what's found in their community, which is mostly dark L's in this context, but where the bilinguals lived had an area with people who came from all over the place, so high geographical mobility, and who had a range of English accents. In coda position, what you're seeing here in black are the dark variants of L for the English children and lots of vocalization. So L vocalization in coda position is a very common feature. The bilinguals, by and large, are doing the same, dark or vocalized variants, but they're also showing a little bit of influence, if you like, from Arabic clear L's in coda positions. But they are still showing very different distributions from their Arabic ones. Now, their Arabic laterals were clear throughout. So it was definitely a different set of realizations. For ours, again, what you're seeing here are the bilinguals results in English, and they mostly produce the approximant R in gray, with a bit of labiodental R and some other realizations, and a tiny bit of influence from the tap, which is the variant from Arabic. And their realizations are non-rhotic throughout. In Arabic, the majority variant is the tap, which is the expected one, with some trills and a tiny bit of influence from English approximants and some other realizations. So again, two sets of very different expectations. However, there was a set of words, again, like the ones I showed you for VOT, that happened to be produced both in the English and the Arabic sessions with very different realizations. Now, if my computer will allow me to play you the sound files.
Pepper.
The word pepper, produced by one of the children in the English sessions and in Arabic.
Pepper.
You'll hopefully have heard with erotic realizations and a very different set of realizations. Word raspberry.
Raspberry.
In English and in Arabic.
Raspberry.
And so on and so on. Rainbow.
Rainbow.
And in Arabic.
Rainbow.
So these children, it wasn't the fact that they couldn't do English with a native accent, if you like, or an accent that represents the input that they hear from English speakers in their environment, but that included the English that they hear from Arabic speakers or other speakers in their environment. And this was very much being used when I did an analysis of the interactions. It was very much being used to either not switch to Arabic when, for instance, they were speaking Arabic to the mums, they switched to English and the mum says, oh, do say it in Arabic, you do know it. And the child kept producing the same words in English, but gave them a bit of an Arabic twist. And it's what I have called phonetic switching in some of my published work. The other thing they were doing is, if they were interacting with mums and the mum wanted them to do something they didn't want to do, they would again switch to English, but this time with a native or with a Yorkshire accent. Or if they really wanted their mums to do something for them, they would speak English, but with an Arabic accent. So what this really tells us, and this is one more example from Strutt, but I think I'll skip it for the sake of time. What this really shows us is that we need to take into account all varieties that bilinguals are exposed to, alongside the kind of focus on quality and quantity of input that we tend to look at in bilingual research. These very much form part of the repertoires for bilinguals and are used for, like I said, convergence and divergence strategies. In other words, they show evidence of sociolinguistic competence rather than, for instance, having saying that the bilinguals therefore have a foreign accent or have a non-target-like acquisition. Now, this is very much a departure from a stance that assumes bilinguals, especially those growing up in an L2 context, so bilinguals in the UK where English is the majority language, there's this assumption that they might filter out foreign accent features in their parents' speech and keep only the native-like features. This is something that Jack Chambers talked about years ago when he looked at Italian and possibly even Spanish immigrants to the US and how the second generation in that community, so the children of these immigrants, apparently didn't even notice the foreign accents of their parents and always spoke English with a native-like accent. And I think he termed it the Ethan experience based on Ethan, one of the children in the studies. Now, the work that we look at here shows that they really do not filter these out. They are very useful for interactions and communicative competence and accommodating or not to your speaker. And they definitely constitute part of what we think of as phonological knowledge. So this issue has become more and more important recently, and it's been picked up in different conversations. One of them includes the importance of looking or incorporating these multiple accented varieties, as well as code switches or code switched varieties, into acoustic models if we want ASR to work better and if we want our automatic models to cope with code switches and to be able to analyze code switching. And a short while ago, Barbara Bullock and Jacqueline Toribio gave an excellent talk on this very same issue as part of a workshop on speech technologies for code switching in multilingual communities. And I think many of the talks are still available online, and I would highly recommend it. It took place in India, actually. Another thing another recent development is this call for all of us researchers to move away from the native ideal, the native speaker ideal, and to think about accentism in both L1 and L2 varieties. So there's you can follow the hashtag on accentism. There's a current project by Erin Carey and Rob Drummond at Manchester, which has been looking at discrimination due to the speaker's linguistic properties, and these relate to both native and non-native, or L1 and L2 varieties, if we don't want to use the term native. It's so hard when it's a term that's been used so often in the literature, but they've been inviting everyone to report on and talk about their experiences in accentism in the UK and around the world. And it's a project that's going to look at ways we as researchers can lead the way in fighting this, in raising awareness of it happening all the time, and in also changing the way we research and the way we look at systems and varieties in order to account for the richness of varieties around us, and therefore that are present in development. Another hashtag to follow is that of accent positivity, and again, along the same lines, this is a recent drive and represents several projects looking at fluid accents and identities. There's been a recent post on this by Maria Dokovova, in particular looking at bilinguals And again, their exposure to multiple varieties, their own use, and how these are often viewed negatively in particular contexts, and how important it is to actually support these, and hence the term accent positivity. Another area relates to L2 teaching and learning, and here, again, there's been a recent call for all researchers to quit their obsession with native-like acquisition, even in foreign language classrooms. So if you look at educational policies in countries like Bulgaria, Malaysia, Saudi Arabia, and I'm sure around the world, they still state that the aim of the English teaching classroom is to produce speakers who have native-like English. And normally it's referring more often than not to sort of a British or American type variety. And this is totally unrealistic when the speakers, when the teachers who are providing the training might be L2 speakers themselves. And there's been a recent pronunciation special interest group conference on equality and inclusion in pronunciation teaching, calling on all of us researchers to look at these other varieties, to think more about intelligibility and comprehensibility rather than native likeness as the goal for the foreign language classroom. And I am really, really excited about how this research is progressing, and about the idea that foreign language classrooms might change the way they set targets for their students. One of my own students, Sarah Al-Gaban from Saudi Arabia, is currently involved in a project that's trialing phonetics training. So we know that oral language training is very important in second language classroom, and that phonetics training has been shown to be very advantageous. But in her L2 Saudi classrooms, instead of just exposing learners to L2 models, she's also going to expose them, to L1 models. She's also going to expose them to L2 models from speakers in their environment who they can look up to, and who speak all sorts of varieties of English that are as good, if not even better, targets to aim for if you think about the context that these learners, where these learners are learning their languages, with their L1 being the majority language. So there's a lot of scope for research here once you start looking at variability and variation. And another aspect, which is going to lead me to the second part of my talk soon, relates to looking at L1 input. And here it's not just in bilingual context, but also even in monolingual contexts, and thinking about the variability in that input. And again, about the kind of focus we've had in the early years in the way we've looked at child-directed speech, that's led us to think that it might be less variable than input to adults, but that also with it potentially having a didactic function, it might be the kind of input that maximizes phonological contrasts so that children notice them and acquire them more easily. Now, in terms of the first aspect, less variable, one of the guest speakers in this series, Paul Fuchs, is going to possibly talk about that later on this term, so I'm not going to cover it today. Instead, I'm going to cover the latter, this idea that caretakers might maximize phonological contrasts in order to support learners, early learners. So I'm going to give an example from research that I've done with Jalal Al-Tamimi, my colleague at Newcastle, on early acquisition of gemination in Lebanese Arabic. So gemination is contrastive consonant length, and many of the Dravidian languages have it. And it's both morphologically and phonologically conditioned, and also interact with phonological vowel length. So you could have pretty much the same segmental content in Arabic in a word like malak, which has short vowels and consonants, but you could have a long vowel in it, malak, and the meaning will change. You could have a long consonant, malak, change again. You could have both long, mala, both vowel and consonant. And then you could also switch the stress pattern, malak, and again, it changes. So very, very important contrastive feature. And you'd think that it's one of the good candidates to look at to see if parents in early input to children might maximize the durational differences, proportional, of course, between short and long consonants or short and long vowels to support the acquisition of this feature. Here's where, just give you an example. In terms of actual milliseconds, the mean consonant duration for a short consonant is about 99 milliseconds, and it's about 168, for a long one. Now, here's where things get a bit more complex. You don't need to be obviously in the UK to look at bilingualism. So you could go and look at a country where Arabic is the main language, but where French and English are very commonly used as well. And French and English do not do gemination. So what might input from French and English, how might it add more variation to what children hear initially from Arabic words, bearing in mind that these code switches from French and English might be loan words, might be mixes, might be all sorts of switches that will not be viewed from the point of view of the child as, oh, this is a different language. So this is all part of the input that they hear. When we looked at what the mums do in these French and English targets, well, for one thing, their medial consonants varied significantly. So sometimes they were short, and I'm going to play you an example here.
Mama, mama.
And bébé.
Bébé, bébé.
But sometimes they were really long.
Papa, papa. Moto.
Now bear in mind, these are all supposedly target short consonants. And just as a reminder, so these are their durations, and these are, again, the Arabic short to long durations. When we dug deeper, we found that this didn't only apply to the French or indeed the English targets, that the mothers were doing this for Arabic as well. So even Arabic words with short targets, they were playing around with the length, or long targets also playing around with the length. And when we looked at the sessions with these children, it was very clear that it was part of it was accommodating to the child's production, part of it was just this interesting thing that duration allows you to do, which is to sort of shorten and elongate words and play with the phonetic patterns totally separately from what you might do if you wanted to make sure that you produced the contrast, the lexical contrast between short and long. And the children were also replicating these, but it was very, very much, the pattern was very much related to the needs of the situation and whether there might be room to basically do convergence in phonetic features, and where both mom and child know exactly what the child is aiming for, and that the duration doesn't really matter so much. So what happened was that when we looked at the development of short and long consonants over time, we found there were no real consequences. What you're seeing here is these children at 18 months old, they have no significant difference between their short in white or their long consonants. But actually, at that age, they have just under 50 words in their vocabulary, and the importance of morphology and morphosyntax for gemination hasn't kicked in yet. So yes, it's not been acquired, but it's not played any big role in communication between them and their parents. At 24 months, though, they show a significant difference between their short and long consonants, and the patterns found here are comparable with those we found for children acquiring, say, Finnish or Japanese or other languages that do gemination. And this here is just the parents by the adults in child-directed speech. So at 24 months already, they're getting close to the adult patterns, and there's no real worry about whether this huge variability in the input has actually sort of impacted their potential acquisition of Arabic gemination. So this early input may not be as simplified or as focused on maximizing phonological contrast as we'd assume. And there's a lot of emerging research in this area showing exactly that. Multilingualism adds more variability, and it's very important to look at the nature of these L2 varieties to appreciate this variability. And this may support growing interest in studying bilinguals or bilingual development of Arab children around the world, especially that their number is growing. So in the last few minutes, I'm going to extend this to look at a case of input to foreign domestic helpers. So this lack of simplification or maximization of phonological contrast got us thinking about input to adults, but who are foreign language learners. And together with Azza Al-Kandi, who's another ex-PhD student of mine who's now at Sultan Qaboos University, we looked at a special case of foreign domestic helpers. So these are adult females from East Asia, Africa, and the Indian subcontinent. They get work placements as adults, as domestic helpers in homes around the Arab world. And the reason this study is original is that when they arrive, they are getting no L2 formal and L2 instruction in Arabic. They are learning as they go in a naturalistic setting from the employers, so basically the parents and the children. The input is mostly limited to their everyday chores with the family. And there's consideration needs to be taken for this uneven power relation between them as employees and the employers. And we wanted to look at the properties of speech addressed to domestic helpers compared with adult directed speech, and to look at any potential interaction between that and the domestic helper's own production and perception abilities. And what drove us to this is, again, a lot of early findings on foreigner-directed speech that suggest clear articulation, where maybe the final stops might be more released, voicing might be accentuated, no cluster reduction, and strengthening of productions. And in terms of prosody, also, the speech might be slower, exaggerated, have more pauses, and more syllable timing, and so on. Now, note most of this work is, early work was phonological. More recent phonetic work has presented more contradictory patterns. So in terms of prosody, indeed, people have found slower speech rate in foreigner-directed speech as opposed to ADS and longer pauses. Pitch has been controversial, higher in some, no difference in others. No differences in intensity have been found or pitch ranges compared with ADS. In terms of segmental patterns, some studies have found expansion of vowel space, others haven't. Some studies have found longer durations, others haven't, and so on, others haven't. So what we wanted to look at then is the interpretations where differences were found have been described as being due to input serving a didactic role, just like for children, or facilitating communication with the listeners, or adapting to their needs, or even accommodating to their own accent. Many of the methods used in these studies were based on imaginary interlocutors. And we still don't know what effect, if any, familiarity with interlocutors might have. So there's still quite a lot to be done. And really, there's no unified theory of foreigner-directed speech, if you like. So here is Oman, and this is where, these are all the countries that our foreign domestic helpers came from. A wide variety. We couldn't limit for L1s because it's a very vulnerable and community to reach, and we have to reach them through the employers, through the gatekeepers, and we basically took anyone who whose employer, and then they, of course, agreed to participate in the study. So because of that, we have their mean age on arrival in Oman was 27. Their age when we tested them was about 37. The length of residence in the Middle East was about 6 years, but there's a massive difference in ranges between their LOR. And when, in fact, we used it to our advantage, we thought length of residence is used as one of the main predictors of perception and production ability in L2 learners and bilinguals. Let's see if we can see an effect of that in our participants. And we took some other information about schooling and literacy. Now, what we did, I beg your pardon, the sounds you see in red are the ones we chose to look at because they were absent from all of the L1s. And we thought at least these would be like something in common that we could look at because they're missing from all the foreign domestic helpers' first languages. We looked at corner vowels to look at this phenomenon of potentially maximizing contrast. We were able to recruit 22 native speaker employer and their domestic helpers. And what we did is we set them up in tasks whereby they were either interacting with their foreign domestic helpers or with Hazza herself, the researcher, who's a native speaker of Omani Arabic. And I'm going to, instead of listing the tasks here, I'm going to show them to you in a minute. But basically, the foreign domestic helpers did picture naming and an AX perception forced choice discrimination task, looking at these consonant pairs that might be difficult to perceive because one or both are not present in their L1. And in terms of the task with the employers to look at the input, we chose a spot the difference task where the domestic helper would get one version of a story, of a picture, the native adult another one, and they have to negotiate the differences, and by doing so, they name them. These are some of the pictures as well, with target items that had the consonants we were interested in and the vowels. And we wanted to look at what, if any, systematic adaptations are made in foreigner-directed speech for the domestic helpers. And following on from what other studies have found, we expected if there were linguistic adaptations, there would be in modifications of complex consonants, in enhancing the contrast maybe between plain and emphatic consonants, higher intensity, expanded vowel space, longer vowel durations. And we wondered if they vary as a function of LOR. Then, to what extent then foreign domestic helpers themselves sensitive to phonemic contrasts in L2 Arabic? How accurate are they at producing them? And again, does LOR play a role? I'm going to skip over the analysis for the sake of time, but basically we analyzed everything auditorily and acoustically. I want to apologize for the noise outside. There's serious drilling happening in our back garden. This is the joy of working from home. And we looked at measures that were basically relevant to the sound and sound categories that we were interested in. Now, just a few results before I conclude. In terms of the input to foreign domestic helpers, What you're seeing here is how sort of native-like realizations were in input to foreign domestic helpers as opposed to the native adult speaker. And we didn't find any difference at all in the realization of all the consonants that we termed these complex consonants that are potentially tricky for our learners to acquire. They were produced in exactly the same way. When we looked at their acoustic features, so here, what you're looking at is the plain emphatic contrast for se and so, plain pharyngeal, in red in adult directed speech, in blue in foreign domestic helper addressed speech. And basically, what you're seeing is F1 in the following vowel, and it shows the plain emphatic contrast, but there's no significant contrast whatsoever between adult directed speech and foreigner directed speech. The same applies to F2. It's showing F2 differences in plain versus pharyngeal, but no differences at all between ADS and FDS. In terms of duration, again, we found no significant differences at all in the durations of plain or emphatic consonants between ADS and foreigner-directed speech. In terms of VOT, again, in red, we're seeing VOT for in ADS for plain versus pharyngalized, and there is a significant difference like we might expect. So these are all indices that are important for the contrast, but the same happens for FDS, no significant difference between ADS and FDS. And the same story continues. Intensity, no significant difference. Spectral moments for plain and emphatic consonants, and I'm happy to come back to these if anyone wants to ask questions. No significant differences whatsoever. Then we looked at the vowel space, and indeed we found a slightly higher vowel space here in blue for foreigner directed speech than ADS. However, when we looked at what this was due to, it was mostly F1 and not F2. And if you look at the corner vowels E, U, and A, in FDS, the straight lines, and ADS, there's only a small difference that relates to higher F1 in FDS, but no real maximization of the vowel space that you might expect. There were small differences in intensity, slightly higher intensity in foreigner-directed speech than ADS, a slightly higher of 0, no difference in duration whatsoever. In fact, when repetitions were in, FDS had shorter duration. So what was remarkable to us is that there's no sign of hyperarticulation or simplification of consonants at all in consonants. They were comparable to ADS on all measures. There was no maximization of contrast, and there was no simplification of complex consonants. There were minor vocalic differences, but what we found that was really interesting, there was no interaction with lengths of residence at all, or even we carried out some foreign accent ratings on the speech of foreign domestic helpers, and they had lots of different accent ratings, but there was basically no differences at all or no impact on that in terms of whether the employees accommodated or not. So we think the potential reasons for this are that the employers are familiar with their foreign domestic helpers, and the nature of their everyday interaction is very formulaic. So if you think about the HNA's hypo theory, Lindblom's theory, you typically adjust your speech, if needed, to the needs of your interlocutor to meet the needs of the daily interaction. But it might just be that in this particular case, the nature of this interaction is so formulaic that there is no need for adjustment. There is no didactic function for sure. It's just about employers getting the chores done. Now, there are also ethnic and cultural differences between the foreign domestic helpers and the native speakers. And it might just be a case that the native speakers are maintaining social distance, and by doing that, also distinctiveness between their accent and that of the domestic helpers, and not using foreigner talk. And there might be also a role of status. Whatever they're doing, it's very clear that it's not accommodation. And when we look at the domestic helpers themselves and their speech, they're not improving over time. So what I'm about to show you is the accent ratings that they got on a scale of 1 to 9, rated by 10 native speakers. They get about 3, as opposed to native speakers who get close to 9. No effect of length of residence at all on accent rating. In terms of their sensitivity to contrasts in an AX discrimination task, native speakers show very high sensitivity, domestic helpers very low. And here I've put the L1s, but the L1s didn't show influence at all. In terms of their production, what you see on the left-hand side is accurate production for plain consonants that are part of their L1 inventories, T, S, and K. But all the complex consonants that we were looking at show very, very low accuracy. So correct is in blue, incorrect is in orange. That's this graph just shows the lack of effect of length of residence. So from 6 months to 20 years, it's more or less the same. Correct is in dark gray, incorrect is in light gray. A slight effect of L2 literacy. So, foreign directed speech is not an automatic outcome of interaction with L2 speakers, despite the degree of foreign accentedness of our domestic helpers. This lack, we would like to argue that this lack of foreign directed speech and the unusual social setting may be contributing to the lack of correlation between LOR and proficiency of these learners, but also possible lack of variability in the input. And this is really what brings me back to the beginning. These learners are only exposed to Arabic from a very small set of speakers. They are basically the employers and their children. They don't go out, they hardly go out, they are hardly exposed to any other Arabic. And I think we really need more work with this population to better understand that potential lack of variability on their linguistic experiences and the potential challenges they face in their daily interactions with employers who do not accommodate to their speech in any way. Thank you. I'll end on this slide because I realized that I've used way more time than I should. Thank you.
Thanks, Ghada, for that really interesting talk. And we have a bunch of questions for you. I'm just going to put them on the screen. Just a second. Yeah. So Preeti asks, using, oh, did we lose the question there? 1 second. I'll just read that out again. Yeah, using L1 and L2 models in the language classroom sounds interesting, but how does one identify an L2 model?
Yes, that's a very interesting question. With difficulty is the short answer. But what we're about to do is delve deeper into how we identify intelligible and comprehensible speakers who are, high functioning L2 speakers who are in the environment of our learners in the L2 classrooms who could provide these L2 models that we are looking for, and who, for all intents and purposes, are actually really produce really good, achievable targets for the learners. But above all, we actually would like to expose them to lots of different varieties. So within, say, the American and British varieties that they do get exposed to through some of the staff in this particular university where we're carrying out the study, but also advanced Saudi learners of English.
Right. Here's another question. It keeps disappearing. How to determine, sorry, it's just me being a bit slow with this. How to determine the input variability during child-directed speech in a multilingual scenario, like, you have states in India where there are 6 to 8 mother tongues that are spoken, and what do you do in those kind of scenarios?
Yeah, indeed. In a way, I was really pleased to be giving a talk to an audience like this, because I know that if you're going to find a very, very rich multilingual context anywhere, it's India. In the early years, it's a little bit easier for the researcher, if you like, to look at input, because before nursery and before exposure to varieties and languages outside the home, you're mostly recording inside the home, and you have slightly better control over who the speakers are, who a child listens to. Outside the home, indeed, I think that there are very, very heterogeneous contexts, and each child's experience is unique, and each community's experience is unique. And while it is harder to represent this variability from all those languages and varieties, I think that whenever we're working with a multilingual child, it's really our duty to find out who their network is, or who are their multiple networks. So which speakers do they interact with on a daily basis, at home, at school, in the neighborhood, at a weekend school, and so on, and try and represent that as much as possible. Because if we're not, we are really missing a trick.
Yeah. I mean, there was another part to that question, which was about, the fact that, in these scenarios, neither the L1 nor the language of wider communication tends to be the medium of instruction, because, you have so many. And all of these languages are sort of, and so there was, I sort of missed out on reading that part of the question. The next question, did you want to add to that, Ghada? Sorry.
I was
did you want to add
just
anything
going to say that I was just going to say that Yanthi simply talked about that recently in a project that she's involved in multilingualism in India, and actually pointed the attention to this slightly problematic aspect of multilingualism, where the language in the classroom isn't any of the languages used by the multilinguals outside the classrooms, and that sometimes it's actually a disadvantage to them compared with multilinguals who hear at least one of their languages in the classroom.
That's right. Yeah. Amar asks, is accent positivity related to semantics, or is it just a perception of the hearers?
Well, I'm not quite sure what you mean by related to semantics. I think that just the fact that we still have to this day people say, I don't have an accent, means that the idea of what an accent is still very warped and very real. And there's almost this implication that therefore having an accent is a negative thing. If somebody is proud of saying, I don't have an accent. And so a lot of it is in the ear of the beholder, but I think it's a conversation that we need to have about accent and what it means.
Yeah, yeah, and perhaps more so in the case of English, because it is, it enjoys the status that it does. We have a question from Indranil. He asks, assuming the articulatory systems would also be differentiated and self-organizing in terms of co-articulatory patterns, how do you think the acoustic articulatory mapping is among bilinguals?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, because for some time we've done more acoustic work and impressionistic work with bilinguals than articulatory work. And I think that right now we no longer have the excuse not to, really, with the presence of ultrasound and EPG and other tools that enable us to do that. What you touch on, I think, is not just the method, but also what one might term as articulatory setting. Because when you speak in a particular language, and some of the work that Jim Scobie and colleagues have done at QMU has shown that you could also have different settings in, say, English and another language, and German. And it really relates to long-term features, not just sort of particular segmental features. And these might therefore influence properties across the whole utterance. And a look at code switching is an interesting one, because it shows you that if your articulatory setting is set for one language or the other, then the phonetic properties of a particular word, a word that's being code switched to in that frame, might actually have the properties of the frame language, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Not entirely related, but I mean, I just remembered when you were talking about the code switching, it reminded me of my MA dissertation. You were talking of those examples, and I had looked at Malayali bilinguals in Liverpool. And I remember, based on who was speaking to them, so I had a British interlocutor, and then there was me. I'd gone in for the Malayalam, sessions, and then I got help with, an L1 English speaker to do the English sessions. And I remember we were showing, it was a picture naming task. And, as soon as it was Chris, she said parrot. And then as soon as it was me, she did parrot, unaspirated, tap in the middle. So some of the stuff that, from the examples you showed reminded me of the same thing that I saw with my MA dissertation. Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah. Very interesting.
There's another question from Indranil. Why the preference for producing pre-voicing and not short lag, but long lag by Arabic English bilingual children, considering aerodynamic constraints around pre-voicing? Is this because of variable acoustic salience?
In fact, it's quite the opposite, Indranil. I'm sorry if I covered these results very quickly. It was, in fact, that they, for Arabic, which does have pre-voicing, they did a bit more short lag than pre-voicing. But what we've noticed is that the monolingual Arabic children were also still acquiring pre-voicing. And indeed, like you say, the aerodynamic constraints for pre-voicing are quite hard to acquire. And there's a fair number of examples from languages with pre-voicing that shows now, with children acquiring that, there's a bit of a delay compared with acquiring short aspiration. And so they indeed showed a bit more short lag rather than pre-voicing.
Right. There's one more from Indranil. Do Omani Arabic speakers not do phonetic accommodation within themselves either, or is it just in SES?
Oh, I mean, I can guarantee you that they do. This question is interesting because it got me thinking about the input that's not addressed to them. So obviously you've got these domestic helpers in Omani homes, and there's the Arabic that's addressed to them, but there's also the Arabic addressed to the family. And we don't know what impact that has. It increases the overall amount of Arabic that they hear, but we also know from child language development that the input that has the impact the most is the one that's addressed to the learner, and where there is this interaction, meaningful interaction, where you create, where your phonological knowledge is built through the interaction. So they might be hearing accommodation elsewhere, but basically from what we have, it's not one addressed to them.
Right. And the next one is something I had thought of as well, but I'll put it on there. This is from Shrujan, who asks, how influential is the difference in the power relation, ma'am? It was there in one of the slides of that you had put up about unusual power relations, and he, what do you think about the role? In this case?
So it's a very interesting question, and we can only guess at this stage because we obviously haven't looked into this in this community in particular. But the reason we thought about it, I mean, there is no doubt that there is a differential power relation. The Omani speakers are the employers, the foreign domestic helpers are the employees, and they are there to do chores around the house. How that may affect the lack of accommodation is something that we concluded by drawing analogies from other types of research. So in studies on foreigner-directed speech, whenever researchers have looked at which speakers accommodate and which speakers don't, there has often been a reference to the ones who later showed negative opinions or expressions of foreigner-directed speech were actually the ones who accommodated less, and the ones who showed positive impressions and opinions of foreign speech, were the ones who actually accommodated more. And so it might just be, we know this from this other area of research, it is quite possibly at play in this case.
We have one last question. Ormita asks, how does variability of input in terms of number of interlocutors compare to variability in contexts or settings of language use in improving perception or production of contrasts over time?
Yeah, interesting question. I mean, I'm absolutely sure that both play a crucial role. In terms of number of interlocutors, we know from phonetic training studies in L2 contexts that introducing more interlocutors, so what's termed as high variability training, is really advantageous, and it brings your L2 learners to the next level as opposed to always hearing from the same speaker. And in a way, this is what got us thinking about this unusual situation of foreign domestic helpers who only ever hear their employers. I mean, it's not great. Then we know that the of context and settings is also very important for sociolinguistic learning, because whether you're monolingual or multilingual, as part of your phonological development, you learn stylistic differences. So not just which language to use with whom, but which style to use with whom, how to talk to your friends as opposed to your bank manager, as opposed to your teacher, as opposed to a stranger in the street. And without these contexts and settings, you're not going to gain the richness of this phonological knowledge that you build over time. So I'd say both are extremely important.
Right. Yeah. Well, that was our last question. So I guess, we're done with the questions. Before we end, we want to present a small token of our appreciation for you, Ghada. Give me a second while I show you what I mean. Let's see. I'm going to try. Yeah, let's see. Is this something loading? I hope it is. Well, it's still showing loading, so we're going to have to. Is it on the screens?
I can't see anything. I've been looking at two screens as well, by the way, so apologies to viewers.
Oh, no, yeah. No, is it?
Me sort of look up.
Something's.
Oh, my goodness. Who did this?
Yeah. Well, it is. Oh, great. So, do you see yourself? I think I should ask.
Yes, it's embarrassing and cringeworthy, and I love it at the
No, it's so this is one of our MA students who recently earned her MA degree in linguistics and language technology from Tezpur University. She's a native of Assam, and she has a keen interest in sketching, and so this is her magic.
Wow.
So her name is Koil Biswas. So thank you, Koil.
Thank you, Cole. Yeah. I am honored. I am truly honored.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna, and Ghada, we're gonna try and of course we'll send you the soft copy, but ideally we'd want to send you a hard copy as well, which will hopefully get to you very soon.
Lovely.
Yeah, but we also want to sort of thank all our participants once again. Please note that our next talk is by Dr. Binny Abraham on the 9th. You can visit our website for more details. We'll also, of course, be sending you info on that. So thank you all once again. That's it from all of us today. And take care and goodbye. See you
Thank
for
you.
the next talk.